Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 2022 Impact Ohio post-primary event, the first ever Impact Ohio post-primary event. In February of this year, the Ohio Chamber purchased Impact Ohio from the Success Group. And I want to thank Mike Toman and Mackenzie Davis, who really developed this into an amazing thing. I see the president back. Is Mike with you? They've been great partners. They've been great to work with through the transition. They're going to continue to be involved. We're working with them on this, and they're helping us as we continue to grow Impact Ohio. The Ohio Chamber obviously was interested in buying Impact Ohio because it had a strong brand and because we share a common goal of keeping Ohioans updated on both politics and policy. So it was a great fit for the Ohio Chamber. We are super excited to be owning and running Impact Ohio, and we're excited about the strong future that Impact Ohio is going to have. The Ohio Chamber, of course, is the leading business advocacy group in Ohio, and we're excited to make Ohio the #1 place to work and live and thrive in the country. Before we get started, I want to make sure, did everybody pick up a card that has a nice little QR code on the back of it? If you would pull it out, and during today, if you have time, especially here quickly, I think it's like a 5-question poll that if you take a picture with your camera of the QR code, it'll open the website and you can just take a quick poll. We'd urge everybody to participate in that. And you know, there's some fun questions, there's some serious questions, and Rick Carfagna, our Senior Vice President of Government Affairs, will brief you on the results a little later, but you've got about an hour to take the poll. I would urge you to do it now, while I'm wasting your time talking. But we're excited to have all of you here today. Obviously, Tuesday was a very interesting primary with lots of interesting races. You're going to hear from some really good panelists today about what happened in the primary, what we expect in the general election, and what happened, why things happened in the primary. They'll offer valuable outlooks that will give you a perspective back to Tuesday's primary, but also a view ahead to the general election. And that's obviously the general election is what matters, because you don't get to make policy unless you get elected. And so, I understand the State House and State Senate, we're not involved in the primary. We're looking forward to an August primary and, getting great legislators nominated and then move on to a general election in the fall. Again, if you have not taken the poll, please take time right now to take the poll. Last but not least, I'd like to thank our diamond sponsor for this event, CVS Health. Can we give CVS Health a big round of applause? I'd also like to thank all of our sponsors, and you can see them on your program. So please take a second to look at those that are supporting this event and making it available to all of us. Thanks again for coming today. Now I get a chance to kick it off to the Chamber's new Senior Vice President of Government Affairs, former state representative, former member of leadership in the Ohio House, who resigned from the Ohio House to come and help us make Ohio the best place to work and live and thrive. Everybody, I give you Rick Carfagna.
Good afternoon. What a strong crowd. This is the first time, obviously, that Impact Ohio has done a post-primary event, so didn't really know what to expect. Like much of you in this room at the mats, but we are very pleasantly surprised with all the participation. So thank you once again. It is my honor to get things started with our very first panel, and I'll start with a little commentary just about, in this age of social media where everybody fancies himself not just an epidemiologist and constitutional scholar, but also a reporter. And so I think now more than ever that there's a renewed emphasis on the importance of the fourth estate. And we are very, very fortunate to have a panel today of very distinguished reporters that cover the State House grounds, as many of you very well know. So to lead us off, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's panel, and it is Anna Stabler, and she is a State House reporter for USA Today Network's Canada Ohio Bureau. She is a graduate of Kent State University, and she previously reported for the Denver Post, the Statesman Journal in Oregon, and the Idaho Press Tribune. And she's going to be here today to moderate our panel, which is observations from the media on the 2022 elections. So with that, Anna.
Next to him, we're going to have Karen Kassler, the State House Bureau Chief for Ohio Public Radio, where she's worked since 2004, which is coincidentally when I went to college. And last but not least is my own coworker, Jessie Ballmer. She covers the state government for the USA Today Network Ohio Bureau, and in case you're still not sure what that means, it means we write for the Columbus Dispatch, the Cincinnati Enquirer, the Akron Beacon Journal, and 18 other papers in the state. So let's get right to the questions. We're going to talk with our panelists for about 50 minutes, and then we're going to leave the last 10 open for questions from the audience. And if that's something that you want to do when we get there, you just raise your hand, and we've got a roving mic that's going to come around and come to you. So I'm going to set a timer here to make sure we don't go past deadline. And let's kick it off with Karen Kassler. So Karen, Ohio voters chose Republican ballots on Tuesday at a rate of about 2-1, according to the unofficial results from the Secretary of State's office. What does turnout in the primary tell us about the chances that Democrats have in November?
First of all, thanks for the invitation to be here. I really appreciate it. This is always so much fun. I don't know that it really tells us anything. I think this was a very interesting race for certainly the Republican Senate race and the Democratic governor's race. And I just don't know that it's any indication, though, of what's going to happen, because 6 months is an eternity at this point. And so I think certainly you could read into this and say that Democrats weren't all that engaged. But I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I mean, I think that there were a lot of Republicans who were engaged because there were 7 people in that field, 5 of which had a serious chance, apparently, toward the end as the shift kept happening. I think when you saw the numbers with Cranley and Whaley, I mean, Whaley got almost 65%, Cranley got 35%, and that showed that a lot of people had made that decision. And so maybe that was one of the reasons. And of course, in the Democratic Senate race, I mean, Tim Ryan got almost 70% of the vote. I think it's very interesting that Ryan Harper and T.J. Johnson were not that far apart. They were only about 5 points apart. So I think that maybe some Democrats weren't all that interested this time because they already had their minds made up. I think it could be different in the fall. I don't know. I don't think that we can really look at it like that.
Jeremy, Jessie, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously, okay, I was also informed to tell you that you can eat your salad, so. Just like, so you're not angry while listening to us. Obviously, the Republican side of the U.S. Senate race drove turnout on that side of the ticket, but I do think it's an indication, at least a little bit, of the number of Republicans who are engaged in the political process right now, and I think it would be a mistake to suggest that it's completely even in Ohio right now. So I think Republicans are going to have a bit of an advantage going into November, and we'll see how that turns out. It's not an insurmountable advantage for the Democrats, but they're going in there with more voters.
Yeah, the only other thing I might add is it's interesting that fewer Democrats voted in this midterm election than they did in the 2018 general election, when there were arguably less competitive races going on. Sherrod Brown was running for re-election with really no opposition. So it is a little surprising to me that Democratic turnout was a bit low, but to read the tea leaves about that it's going to have a major effect necessarily in the general election, you can't really tell. There's a lot that can happen between now and November. As the late Roe v. Wade thing can tell, like things can change on a dime.
I will say one thing that's interesting in all the discussion about early voting and possibly making changes to early voting, there were a lot more Republican ballots returned for counting in the early voting period than there were Democratic ballots. And I just think that that's interesting as we have these discussions about cutting back the early voting period or making changes to it. More Republicans were using it this time than Democrats, and the Republicans have been the ones talking about making the changes.
Yeah, and speaking of turnout, Jeremy, the 33 state Senate races and 99 state House races weren't on the ballot on Tuesday. Those primaries appear to be coming in August, and so what do you think the turnout will be for those elections, and how will it impact those races?
The turnout's going to be pretty low. Turnout's going to be pretty low. I don't know about you, but a lot of people, they just don't vote in August elections. In fact, that's why the Ohio House passed last December a bill to get rid of August special elections. People are on vacation, people are preparing for school, and people, most importantly, right now, a lot of people don't even know that there's going to be a primary. Well, because actually right now, officially, there is no set primary. So I think the combination of that, it's going to be low, and it's a lot of people are going to be in Michigan or the upstate New York instead of voting here.
Yeah, I think my mic cut out. Can you guys hear me okay? I was going to say, I had planned on being in Florida with my family, but that's not going to happen now. But Karen, Jesse, any thoughts on how this might impact what candidates win?
I mean, I think it'll be the candidates who are best known in their communities. That's like such a basic answer, but I think it'll probably favor incumbents who've been on the ballot before, or people who have prominent endorsements. It's, when there's lower turnout, it's only the people really committed to voting who have a really strong opinion who are going to turn out. Your casual voters are just not going to show up for August 2nd.
And I think Jeremy's right that we don't even know. I mean, it could change. The Ohio Redistricting Commission is meeting this afternoon, and we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it seems likely that there will be something done this afternoon, but there's always that May 28th date set by the federal court that if something isn't done or those maps are not upheld as constitutional, then the third set of maps, because we're on the fifth set, the third set of maps will be implemented. And whether that's enough time, I mean, the third set of maps is recommended to be implemented because the boards of elections were already starting to put those in place. But I think we're kind of in this space of unknowns here. And given that this is the first time we ever did this, it's all been very extraordinary.
Yeah, okay, great. I do think the mic is dead. So, I was going to say, let's follow this up with a little more general question on redistricting. And since I know how much Jesse loves talking about map making, we're going to start with her. So, these maps are only going to be good for 2022, these congressional maps that we just had winners in. Will there be an effort to change the process yet again, or what's this going to look like in January 2023?
Yeah, I think Route 313 of the Ohio State House is like my second residence at this juncture, but
Does your mail make sense for you?
yeah, I should have things up there. 22. So on the state legislative maps, which we still don't have a finalized version of, the Ohio Redistricting Commission is meeting later today. There's a 9 a.m. deadline tomorrow to get the Ohio Supreme Court their fifth version of these maps for your state house and senate seats. And right now, I'm not 100% sure what they're going to send the Ohio Supreme Court. It's possible that they'll just send them some version of the third maps, which is what this panel of 3 federal judges, at least 2 of those judges, have said. If nothing is approved, if nothing is found constitutional, then we're going to impose these maps that were drawn on February 24th, and were later found unconstitutional by the Ohio Supreme Court, in part because of this issue with partisan symmetry, which is like a much debated topic, but whether these toss-up districts are favoring one party or the other. So it's possible they'll pass some version of that. Auditor Keith Faber has come up with some ideas on how he would tweak that map, because he actually voted against the February 24th map, saying it advantaged Democrats too much. So that's where the state legislative maps are. If the federal court imposes that third map on May 28th, that only lasts for 2022, so we're gonna have to come up with something else for 2024. On the congressional side, the maps that we just used on May 3rd are being challenged before the Ohio Supreme Court, and that decision is expected probably early June, so we'll see whether or not they're okay with that version of the map. So far, the Ohio Supreme Court, by 4-3 majority, has rejected every map that has been sent to them, so it's probably not great news for this next congressional map, but each one is different, so we'll see what they end up doing there. So we could be in a situation where we have maps that only last for 2022 and have to come up with something different for 2024. Even in the best case scenario right now, these maps are only lasting 4 years because there hasn't been a bipartisan support for a 10-year map. So it's a mess. I don't think anyone likes how this has turned out, Republicans, Democrats, and voters. So what that means going forward, will there be an effort to change the language? Will there be an effort to, if the balance of the Ohio Supreme Court is different, will some of these things be different or pulled back or something? I mean, it's going to be fascinating to watch for the next couple of years.
Yeah, so let's dive into some of the specifics of the races. So we're going to start with the big one, the Republican primary for U.S. Senate. And so, Jeremy, how big an impact did former President Donald Trump's endorsement have on this race?
Well, J.D. Vance's senior advisor said, I actually have a quote here. It's basically, he said, quote, "It was his endorsement that secured the nomination for J.D." So it's Vance's own campaign saying that Trump made all the difference here. And, you know, if you look even just a month ago, in mid-April, Vance was languishing in polls and he was being hit by a multi-million-dollar ad campaign from the Club of Growth. He was not going to win this election. And if you look what happened on Tuesday, not only did Vance win, but every Ohio candidate endorsed by Donald Trump won. Now, many of them ran unopposed, let's say Brett Winstrip. But but you had not only J.D. Vance win the primary, but a lot of these congressional candidates like Max Miller, Madison Jessiato, Gilbert, and so Trump's endorsement, I think people are paying. This was a big win for Trump and a feather in his cap because it showed that his decision, who he likes, still, he can be a power broker. You know, and there are all these think pieces about how he's, you know, losing power and other people are challenging him. And this was a big boost for Donald Trump's image.
Yeah, this is the kind of details that like journalists salivate over, but like there was a piece of paper in J.D. Vance's hand when he was going up to thank, and there was, you know, a list of people, campaign manager, et cetera, and the largest name on that list was Trump in big bold letters. So I think he knows who got him across the threshold on this race, and it was and the former president, I think, sent out an email yesterday through his State of America app that just showed the polling and how it changed after the endorsement, after the rally, and so especially in a crowded race, especially when so many of the candidates in this race were touting themselves as the Trump candidate, it's hard to run as a Trump candidate without that actual seal of approval. And I think there was some question whether endorsing 2 weeks before the election, right before Easter, like was this going to have the boost that everyone, that the former president hoped it would, but I think it really did. And a lot of voters, as you all know, kind of take a look at this in the final weeks of the election anyway.
Karen, anything to add?
Well, yeah, when Trump's own campaign, whatever, has tweeted out exactly that Real Clear Politics graph showing the impact of the endorsement, it's hard to make the argument that the endorsement didn't have impact. Though I have seen some opinion pieces that have tried to say that this is interesting because Trump picked somebody who had been critical of him in the past, and that suggests that maybe this wasn't specifically about Trump. But I think you can't discount the money that was involved in this. The Peter Thiel tech billionaire money, the connections at Fox News, which even though Trump criticizes Fox News, they still obviously have some influence. I think that's a really big part of this as well.
If I could just add, I think, yeah, it would be just to clarify, I don't think it was just the Trump endorsement that won this race. I think Aaron's absolutely right. You know, Peter Thiel he gave $15 million to boost the candidacy of J.D. Vance. That's the most anyone has ever given to boost a Senate candidate. Mostly through, you know, outside money, but still, like, perhaps even more than Donald Trump, Peter Thiel got J.D. Vance's nomination.
So Karen, I also want to talk about Senator Matt Dolan. So he was also in the race to go to U.S. Senate. He won about 20% of the primary vote on election night by intentionally not seeking the Trump endorsement. He had a pretty good showing, but is there a place for candidates like him in the Ohio GOP?
Well, I think the final results show that maybe there is. I mean, J.D. Vance got 32% of the vote, and Josh Mandel almost 24%, but Matt Dolan 23%. And the surge was coming later to the point where I think a lot of people who had written Dolan off in the beginning, saying if you're not going to go full Trump, you're not going to get there, may have been a little surprised. On election night, Tim Ryan, who is now going to be J.D. Vance's Democratic opponent, said he's going to specifically go for those Dolan voters because he says that they don't have anything in common with J.D. Vance and the Trump camp. So I think that there certainly is a significant portion of the very small percentage of people who did vote in the election who are looking for something else potentially. And so I think that to write off those people, just like to write off the Trump endorsement as being no big deal, would probably not be a really good idea because every vote potentially could count here.
Anybody have anything to add, or should we move on to the next question?
I would just say that just the whole Senate race shows that the Ohio Republican Party is pretty split right now, at least in terms of the electorate. When you have county party chairs, you know, this backlash against Trump's endorsement, I mean, I don't tell you if you're a Republican that there's a lot of different points of view within the party right now. And if anything, the Senate race has revealed those fissures. And it's not exactly a monolith right now. If it ever was one.
And Vance said on election night that now is the time to unify. And I think he was speaking exactly to that. But also, I think it's really interesting that Rob Portman, when he endorsed Jane Timken, I mean, Rob Portman is a twice elected senator in this state, and his endorsement got her, she ended up at less than 6%, which is, I think it really gives you an indication of where things have gone since Rob Portman sought re-election 6 years ago.
Yeah, so Jesse, I know you've been focused on the gubernatorial primary, which is a terrible word, just gonna say it. But Governor Mike DeWine won the primary, and though none of his challengers came within about 20 points of him, the governor didn't win a majority of Republican voters. Do you think he would have won Tuesday's primary had he not been the incumbent?
Gosh, this is an interesting theory. I was like, there's a lot of different ways you could slice this. So 48% is what Mike DeWine ended up getting. His challengers, Jim Renacci came in second, and Joe Blystone, this kind of restaurant owner slash farmer slash cowboy hat wearer, came in third. Blystone actually got 22 votes, or 22 counties. He won. There were smaller, kind of less populous counties, which is why he came in third. Mike DeWine ended up getting 64, and Jim Renacci got 2, including Medina, which is his home county, where he was pretty involved in the county GOP there. So this race was always about splitting the anti-DeWine vote. Like, everyone in Ohio knows who Governor Mike DeWine is. Everyone knows his positions. He's been in politics. He is, you know, everyone kind of knows where he stands. And so there was a lot of frustration. I'm not sure if Ohio knows it more so than anyone else about restrictions on businesses and restaurants and closing of the polls, and there was a real backlash from these restrictions that were placed on by Governor Mike DeWine's administration in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so that frustration resulted in this very heated, very contentious primary in a way that most incumbents just don't face. Like, it's not typical across the country to have this many people challenging your incumbent governor with years of experience. And so, but it was always going to be split. So the moment where Joe Blackstone and Jim Rennicki stayed in this race, it was always going to be divided, and that was always going to advantage Mike DeWine. So 48% means, you know, something like 52% of the Republicans who went out to vote did not want Mike DeWine to be their pick for the nominee. And I think maybe one strong, well-known, well-funded, organized candidate might have taken advantage of that, but that just was not a race that was playing out here today. So Mike DeWine was going to win this primary, and he did, and I don't know how much that affects him going into November, so we'll see.
Yeah, thanks. So, Jeremy, before we leave the statewide races to talk about some state house issues, I wanted to talk about U.S. Representative Tim Ryan. So he's now the Democratic nominee who will be challenging J.D. Vance for our open Senate seat in November. But Ryan started pivoting towards the center weeks ago, despite having an opponent who was trying to pull him to the left. Is this his strategy for November?
It's definitely a strategy for November. If you've seen his ads on TV, he's playing darts and talking about how he doesn't like what the Democrats are doing. You know, I'm not trying to separate himself from being a cultural warrior and
And that was a free primary ad.
Yeah, and it's just the whole time. I guess that shows too how seriously he took the primary. That he's basically running general election ads in the primary. But yeah, he's just the whole time. His way, he thinks his path is, I'm going to kind of take the Sherrod Brown, blue-collar, lunch pail image, and that will get me some of this moderate, white, working class vote that helped Trump to win this state by more than 8 points for the past 2 elections. So whether that he'll do it, obviously remains to be seen. But he definitely thinks he's all in on that path. And I don't see if he can do it.
Well, I think the final results indicate that he really wasn't getting a huge challenge from the left. I mean, Morgan Harper got just under 18%. And what I think is amazing is T.J. Johnson, who didn't even file FEC forms for fundraising. I mean, she didn't do any sort of advertising whatsoever or any real events. She still got 12.5%. So it suggests that Ryan, what he did before is what he's going to continue to do. And I think when he says after he won that he's going to go specifically after those Matt Dolan voters, he's campaigning with Sherrod Brown. He sounds like Sherrod Brown. He sounds more Republican on some issues than many Democrats do. Look, you talk about immigration and things like that. I think that's pretty clear that that's his strategy.
Yeah, so Karen, Ohio's state lawmakers have introduced a number of controversial pieces of legislation about education this year. So from several divisive concept bills to a version of Florida's, what opponents are calling the Don't Say Gay bill. Do you think that these will play a role in the race for governor and U.S. Senate, or will education be a big issue generally?
I think it's been a winning issue for Republican candidates. They've been talking about it. Now, it didn't propel a lot of school board candidates last year to winning big school board races, but it's been a big issue that Republicans nationwide have talked about. And so I imagine this is going to be the kind of issue that's going to get attention. You've got Greg Abbott now in Texas talking about filing a lawsuit to get rid of the Department of Education at the federal level. So obviously, it's still a big issue for Republicans who are concerned about things that they see are happening. Whether those things are actually happening in schools is the debate, I think. And so I don't know whether some of these bills will move. I mean, the one that really got a lot of attention before the House Bill 616, the so-called Don't Say Gay bill, was House Bill 327, which would have a huge impact on local communities. I mean, because it specifically states that there can't be these divisive concepts in schools, in colleges and universities, in state agencies, and in local governments. That's potentially really wide-reaching, and I know there have been some real concerns about that one. Whether these bills move forward before the election, I think that largely depends on when we're going to get a primary, because then that kind of sets the calendar on when we're going to see state lawmakers doing stuff across the street.
Yeah, Jesse, Jeremy, any thoughts?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how this delayed primary on the state house races affects just what kind of bills we're discussing between now and August. I don't know if that means your typical like pre-primary, we're going to talk about like the most, like, voter sensitive bills. Like, for example, we had a bill on the trigger ban on the Roe v. Wade decision last week. That was right before the primary. Those are the kind of issues that people like to talk about right before the primary. So will we be doing this in late July? I'm not sure. Like, they typically take a break right before the primary and don't come back until almost lame duck usually. But it'll be interesting to see if this August 2nd primary affects the calendar at all. Obviously, we're still working on the capital budget.
Oh, that will good.
I think if, no matter whether these bills pass or not, Democrats are going to do everything they can to make an issue out of them. You're going to see a lot of ads for candidates that have little or no connection to the state house, but definitely for governor, because obviously the governor plays a role in signing bills. But the Democrats are going to use these bills to fundraise. They're going to use these bills to try to get their base out and limit Republicans to a more limited extent. But certainly the Democrats you're going to hear about don't say gay all the way through election day.
Well, I'm looking at my clock, and it says 11:50, so I just want to thank Jeremy and Karen and Jesse for sitting for all my questions and all of yours. Thank you guys.